Okay.
Hello?
So Ian, you said your dream, something is with
Oh
your
no, no,
dreams.
just my sleep schedule. I'm up late.
Uh,
I'm up early. Really tired. Not the dreams so much. I mean, I had some strange dreams, a few
okay.
nights, but it's
Ah,
nothing major. Just my sleep schedule.
sleep
Like
schedule.
that. My
Um,
days are very busy. My mornings stuff's going on. I'm up late at night. You know.
okay. For those watching on Facebook Live, welcome. My name's Allan. Obviously, you're on my friend feed, so you are aware of that. Sorry, I am just still new to doing this on Facebook Live. I tried to do it and I tried to do it. I'm not sure what happened, but apparently we are on Facebook Live now. Ian is in Portland, Oregon, in America. How's the weather there?
It's been quite lovely.
Quite
Uh,
lovely. Okay.
Spring, everything's blossoming. The days are warmer. The
Okay.
afternoons are actually warm. It's amazing.
I'm jealous. We had a little bit of spring last week, but we're back into the freezing temperatures again right now here in Toronto. Karen, you're in Mexico, in the middle of the desert, sort of desert lake. How's the weather down in Mexico?
Beautiful. Everything's blooming. The jacarandas are out.
Uh,
It's full on spring with great weather. Really beautiful.
okay. Hamed, how are you? You're in Cairo,
Yeah,
Egypt.
yeah,
So you're in a different part of the world, a different landmass.
yeah. Now we are entering the spring. Actually, spring it's starting to get very hot now. But the
Okay.
difference in temperature is very wide between the daylight, the daytime, and then the night. So it's
Okay.
yeah, it gets very cold at night, and it's very hot during the day.
Yeah, no, for us it's still below freezing right now. Last week we got up to +9. This is
Yeah,
Celsius, so that was probably somewhere in the 50s
yeah.
Fahrenheit, but it's gone right back
Actually,
down.
my daughter is very yeah. My
Yeah,
daughter is very happy because she lives in London, Ontario.
yeah,
She studies there,
yeah,
and she was very happy. A few days ago, she said that it's 13
yeah,
degrees
yeah.
centigrade, which is amazing compared to
Yeah.
-15.
Yeah, and I mean, she lives about 150 kilometers from where I am. So the University of Western
Yeah,
Ontario is in
yeah,
London, Ontario. It's a
yeah,
little bit warmer here, I think, than London, Ontario, but she's not too far away. So
yeah,
at the beginning, how is the inner work going? I mean, it's all about the inner work. It's all about bringing these teachings into ourself. I've been posting recently on my Facebook wall about the difference between knowledge and understanding. Knowledge is the facts and figures and information we can accumulate in our head brain, whereas understanding is a product of our being. As our being grows, our ability to understand this knowledge grows. And so we really have to focus on growing our being rather than stuffing our head with so much knowledge. Knowledge is good. It's good to a point. It's like a roadmap, but it's a map is not the reality. And ultimately, all of the knowledge of the teachings we have to bring back into practical experience. We've got to understand it, so to speak, within our bones, within our flesh, within the marrow, within our bones. And we do that, and that's a metaphor, and we do that through growing our being. And the only way we can grow our being is not to learn up here, not to sit in a classroom and absorb information, but to do practical inner work, to become aware of our breathing, to become aware of the sensation of our hands, to become aware of what we can see, hear, smell, taste, to become aware of the sensation of self, our whole body, to become aware of our feelings. I will describe this in a little bit, but it's coming back into this present moment as often as we can and in the proper form and sequence is very important for growing our inner being. And there are various stumbling blocks. The reason we cannot stay here in this present moment for too long is because we're leaking energy elsewhere. We could be leaking energy through negative emotions. We could be leaking energy through the state of identification, through formatory thinking, the words that whirl around in our head, through excessive movements and shaking our body, through internal considering, thinking that everything should revolve around us. There are very specific ways that we leak energy, and we've got to begin fixing this energy. And before I actually go back to the members here who are present today, Karen last week talked about a certain degree of annoyance that she was feeling when she was doing the laundry or the dishes. And I have a group that I meet with live on Tuesday evenings, and I haven't posted this yet, but I did a 30-minute hypnosis recording. So about the first 10 minutes is to put us into a deep, relaxed state where we can begin to communicate with the subconscious mind. And I focused on this issue specifically, giving plenty of suggestions, and I will be posting it on the Gurdjieff Group of Toronto website, our YouTube channel, and I will be posting it on my own wall on Facebook. But it really is implanting suggestions to stop throughout the day and ask, what am I feeling? So right here in this moment, what am I feeling? And this is an aspect of mindful awareness. In order to feel our feelings, in order to be aware of what we are feeling right now, we have to inwardly detach. We have to inwardly separate ourselves from ourselves, to use Mr. Gurdjieff's words, in order to observe our feelings. So what am I feeling right now? And then the next question is, why am I feeling this feeling? You know, perhaps the bus just took off and we missed it. And in which case we are annoyed because we missed the bus. But oftentimes the feelings that we're feeling are not directly related to what is going on in our life. It doesn't mean our feelings are irrational. It means that our feelings are ancient feelings, and something that was going on in our life triggered this ancient feeling. And so then the next question is, why am I feeling this feeling? And if the feeling is appropriate for the given moment, and I have to be honest, all negative emotions, or most negative emotions, are not really appropriate for the given a moment. We should be putting ourselves in situations where we rub our nose in those tasks that create negative emotions. Such as, you know, if you get negative emotions when you do the dishes more. If you get, negative emotions, annoyance, frustration at the bus, you miss the bus, you should consciously try to miss the bus and turn up the dial of some of those negative emotions. But if they're repetitive negative emotions, if they continually reassert themselves over and over and over again, they are ancient emotions. And there's a timeline that we can follow back to our childhood. And so I'm going to be posting a hypnotic recording with, it starts with the hypnosis, 10 to 15 minutes of hypnosis with a lot of suggestions. To become aware, to stop throughout the day and become aware of what I am feeling here in this moment. And is this feeling appropriate? And if not, where does it come from? Where in my childhood did this feeling arise? So, that's, Karen, when we talked about last week, that's what I ended up doing with the group that I work with on Tuesday night. And I got my phone out and I recorded it. So I've got a recording. I still have to merge the recording with some kind of visual image in order to post it onto YouTube. And I want to put some binaural beats in the background at 1.5 cycles per second to help us go into the hypnagogic state. But I will be posting that. And it will, at the subconscious level, just prime us more to become aware of our emotions. So with this said, any comments on the inner work, on being present here and now in this moment?
I had something come up while I was driving. I had some more of that anger come up at people doing some stupid stuff on the road. And I remembered you had said that there's the sort of lever between anger and love. So there was one or two moments where I was able to catch it as I was, getting crunchier and crunchier, and try and flip it to love towards them, just to feel it and kind of put it out, and then sort of have it be like, oh, they're having a rough day or whatever,
Yeah.
And it was not something that stuck. So like after that, I definitely still was getting irritated at people, but it seemed to kind of pull my identity away from that a little bit. Yeah, just less identification around the anger and around the love, and just how sort of changeable they are. Those emotions aren't as overpowering as I necessarily think.
Years ago, what I used to do was I used to use the imaginative faculty of my head brain when I was in situations like that. I remember when I first came across the teachings, I was a 23-year-old student at a university here in Toronto, York University. And I remember one day in particular, I was down in the cafeteria, and one of the lunch ladies really irritated me. And I got really annoyed. And so I started to imagine that she had a 2-year-old child who was sick last night, and she was making minimum wage, and she didn't have a lot of sleep. And I invented this fictitious story to explain her behavior and explain why she was a little sharp with me. And I have to admit, being a lunch lady making minimum wage, working at a university where there are all these entitled people walking around with their noses in the air, could really set you off. But I created this backstory to explain potentially why she was like that. And then I found that I began to really observe this in other situations and make similar stories. So someone who cut me off, perhaps they're rushing home because they have to bring medicine home because they have a sick baby, and I started to invent these things, and I knew they were inventions and they were part of my imagination, but it was sort of the first little step towards trying to bring up the feeling of love. I have to admit that, when you feel anger, and to try and then summon the feeling of love is pretty difficult for people who are new on the path. You're not new on the path, but it can be really a challenge. How do we do that? As an NLP practitioner, neuro-linguistic programming, we were taught that there's the state of love, there is the experience of love, and there is the process of love, SPE. And I do that as a triangle. The state of love is, we're in that state of love. The experience of love is the physical memory of a moment when we felt love. And the process of love, there's always a very subtle process that goes on within our body that allows us to feel love. And, in hypnosis, where do you feel that feeling most in your body? In your heart. Okay, where does it go to next? It goes up into your eyes. Then where? Into your smile. And it's slightly different. The process is different for everyone. And the state of love is the experience of love. And so through manipulating those, when I came back to Canada in 2002, my mother picked me up at the airport. I drove her home. And then I took her car and drove all the way across the city to see my kids, and I hadn't seen them in months. And as I parked, they saw me, they ran out of the house, I put my arms around them, and that was the memory and the experience and the process that I used to generate a feeling of love within me. I had focused on a very, very specific memory that it overwhelmed me with the amount of love that I felt. So whenever I had that anger, it would be that memory that I would summon with those feelings. It eventually got to the point where I just had to summon the experience of love. I just had to remember that because I had practiced it so much. So there are all these little steps that we can take. to begin to do that.
Hey, kitty, 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 kitty.
Now, the corollary to this is when you feel anger, to try and summon the feeling of love, but ultimately you want to hold anger and love together, and you want to be in the position between them, and that's where it gets even more difficult. So these are steps, these are processes. So, try and invent stories of why that person cut you off, why they were in a rush. And the real story is because their ego extends to the dimension of the car, and they are oblivious to their behavior, and they don't really care. And they're really in a low mechanical state. But you can start spinning stories like, oh, they're rushing home with medicine or whatever.
Well, something that occurred to me and that you kind of touched on was, when I get angry, I have a story already. Like, oh, that guy's a jerk. That guy doesn't care. And that's as much an imagination as me saying, they're rushing home with medicine for their sick kid. Like, I don't know what their situation is. If I'm honest, I have no idea what's going on. So if I'm going to use one story, I might use another story.
Yeah.
Can I say something here?
Yes, Karen, please.
I find in those situations, for me, all I have to do is know that person suffered badly. I don't know what their suffering is. I don't even need to go into that, but I just see suffering in people now, and that's really a bridge to me to compassion. So things like that, I've kind of managed to have my own way of dealing with it. Works.
Yeah, I last week I talked about doing it. I'm going to put it off probably till next week or whatever, but or whenever it fits in. But C.S. Snott, in his book A Pupil's Journey, Mr. Gurdjieff gives him an exercise for assimilating the active elements in the air and creating an evolving, developing octave of air and the air we breathe in. And it was very similar to what you said, Karen, to become aware that, I'm mortal, that the person that my eyes focus on is mortal, to become aware that I'm going to die, that they are going to die, and to begin to develop our humanity that way and look at other people as suffering creatures, trapped in their negativity, trapped in their blindness, trapped in their habitual routines. So yeah, that's a very good practice. Ahmed, you raised your hand.
I have a question here regarding this polarity between anger and love. A couple of days ago, I was reading in a book by someone called Naraqi. He's one of the Sufi teachers that Naqshbandi way is following his teachings. He was talking about the humanity is there are four forces trying to control ourselves or our nafs, our bodies. The mental and the power of the instinctual, which is the temperament, and the anger, which is the courage and the anger. And the fourth one is called the force of illusions. And that was a little bit confusing to me. I mean, I understand the mental part, the instinctual part, and the emotional part, which is the vital, the vital force or the mental force and the emotional force.
Yeah.
But the fourth, the number four, is he called it the illusion, the force of illusion. And this was confusing to me. Where does this fit in Gurdjieff's model?
There are 4 levels of consciousness that Mr. Gurdjieff taught to Uspensky in Search of the Miraculous. There is deep sleep. That's when we're in bed at night, we're sleeping. The next level, he called the waking state, but he's also referred to it as waking sleep. It's the level that most people exist in throughout their entire lives. The next level up is personal consciousness. That's mindfulness, the mindful awareness of myself, of what I can see, what I can hear, what I can smell, what I can taste. And then the next level is the awakened state, which he called objective consciousness. And we've got to understand the distinction between subjective and objective consciousness. Now, For me, that illusionary world is a faculty or product of the head brain. The head brain can either be aware of what it sees, what it hears, what it smells, what it tastes. These are all connected to the head brain. But the head brain is also capable of generating words and images. Now, the words that I am speaking, you think I'm speaking English. I think I'm speaking English, and I am speaking English. But I'm really making all of these phonemes, these sounds that are coming out of my mouth, that I have associated automatically over my whole lifetime with certain meanings. And you have those same phonemes and those same associations in your mind. So if I was speaking Chinese or Greek or Russian, I would be speaking what I would understand as perfect sentences, but you wouldn't understand me because you don't have those associations in your mind. What this means is that even though we seem to be speaking the same language and you seem to be understanding me, there is a degree of illusion around language. This is not fully real. There's a very subjective quality to language. This is something Mr. Gurdjieff addresses in the first chapter from the author in Beelzebub Tales, how the linguistic component of our language is somewhat illusionary. Now, we can take this one step further. I'm about a mile from a major body of water, a huge body. It's so wide, and it's a freshwater lake that you can almost not see across it, barely see across it. Usually you can't. Now, in the middle of that lake, at the deepest part, there is this imaginary line that goes through that lake. And on this side of the lake, it's this beautiful, exalted, wonderful country called Canada. And on the other side of that imaginary lake is, well, that's America. And these are collective hallucinations. The pieces of paper and coins that we carry around in our pocket and give value to are collective hallucinations. This is part of the head brain. The head brain has the ability to engage in all of these collective hallucinations, and not just collective. We can engage in individual hallucinations. But when we think about Canada and America, does the fish that swims across that magical line that we hallucinate know on one side it's in Canada and one side it's in America? No, that is an illusion. It's a delusion. That border only exists in one place in the entire universe, and that is in the minds of human beings. It does not have an objective reality. It is purely a subjective phenomenon. Now, we can talk about, say, I live in the city Toronto, the name Toronto, the various illusions and delusions that I ascribe to Toronto are hallucinatory. But we can also talk about, there's a reality to Toronto. There's a sewage system, there are roads, there are wires, there are various things that, a squirrel would be able to see. But a squirrel wouldn't be able to see the street out in front of me. They wouldn't know that they were crossing Broadview. They probably wouldn't even know that they were crossing a street. So we live in this world where we impose these collective, and not just collective, but these hallucinations onto things. I once watched a video where this person, and he used the term collective hallucinations, and or consensual reality. And he said he was discussing it over years with a group of friends, and they wanted to try and figure out what the biggest collective hallucination that we have. And they came up with the fact that for me, here and now, it's 11:02 a.m. on Sunday, March the 17th. That today is Sunday, and there's weekends and weekdays. And so much of our life has revolved around this collective hallucination. We've put our working hours. We've done all sorts of things to make our reality conform to this collective hallucination. So we live in a very subjective universe, which is really within our minds. The only place that Canada, America, Mexico, Egypt exist is in the minds of human beings. It does not exist anywhere else in this planet except in our minds, and it does not exist anywhere else in the universe. So this is part of the illusionary nature of reality. We wake up and, you get a bang on the head and you're shocked and you go to the hospital. And one of the first things the doctor will ask you is, what day is this and what year is this? As if the day and year had some kind of an objective reality. It's a consensual, subjective reality. It's an illusion that we've imposed on our world. And I'm just talking about the major ones that it's easy to convey, but this happens over and over and over again. We live in this deluded world, this deluded environment. Mr. Gurdjieff said that there were 4 states of consciousness. And the difference between sleep and the dreams that we have when we are asleep and what is going on in our mind when we are awake is that when we are asleep, our body's immobile. When we are awake, those dreams continue. People do not realize how subjective, how illusionary the thoughts and images that whirl around in their minds from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to sleep are. And he says that makes us far more dangerous. When we're asleep, we can't do any damage. But when we're awake, we can convince other people that these delusions are real, that they're worth fighting for, that they're worth killing for. And, when we look at it and we strip ourselves of those delusions, we begin to see reality from a more objective basis. So the whole process of waking up is to move from being conditioned in the subjective state to developing an objective awareness, to seeing where these illusions manifest themselves. So getting back to your question, Hamed, I would put the head brain and the delusionary capability together and say that the ability, that delusion ability is within the head brain. And it's our ability to impose meaning. Today is Sunday. This is Canada. My name is Allan. That's one of the biggest delusions we carry around. Having children, when I named my children, it almost felt like naming a character in a novel. There was a fictitious quality to the actual naming, and then it comes back in the birth certificate, and then you write it down in all sorts of forms, and it seems to take on a reality of its own. As a child, my parents attached the label, the name Allan, to me. So in the crib, oh, look at Allan. How's Allan doing today? Oh, look, Allan's now walking. Oh, Allan's. And throughout my whole life, they used this artificial, illusionary label to identify me with. And so I think I'm Allan. And I remember the first time at a campus newspaper when I had a little article printed to see my name in print. But it's delusionary. And so we live in all of these delusions that are not real. We need a name. We need to identify ourselves. We need to be able to, send out mail and get mail and have identification, but it's an illusion. It's a consensual and collective hallucination. It's not who we really are. Okay, one thing I wanted to talk about today is something that I've never really seen people talk about in terms of the Enneagram, and I want to bring it back to inner work. There's a chapter in Beelzebub Tales called The Proper Form and Sequence. And this really discusses the proper form and sequence for doing inner work. And the proper form and sequence for doing inner work is to first develop the ability to become aware of the sensation of self. So to first work on developing an awareness of our physical body as one organic whole. And this can be a little difficult for some people, particularly when Mr. Gurdjieff started working with Europeans in the 1920s. They were all in their head. They were very detached from their body. Éor Arage talks about how when he went to the priory or the prieuré in France, they had him digging ditches and whatever, and he was one of the most gifted editors in the English language at that time. And he had lived up here, and he had to get into his body and really become aware of his body through practical hard work, through digging, through getting into his body. None of this was explained to him, but once he started to let go of the resentment, to get into his body, to enjoy being in the physical dimension, Mr. Gurdjieff came by and said, okay, you don't have to do that anymore. Let's go have coffee. But we have to develop this awareness of our physical body. The Buddha, in his great discourse on mindfulness, said the first thing to become mindful is the air flowing through the tip of our nose, then to become aware of the sensation of air flowing from our lungs back to our nose, and then to become aware of our body breathing. These are all sensory components, aware of the sensation of self. This belongs actually in second place. In first place is the receiving of impressions. So what we see, hear, smell, taste. But if we are not able to hold, the sensation of our body as one organic whole in the back of our awareness, we can't do that other thing properly. Things start to get mixed up. So there's a sequence in terms of learning to become more personally conscious, learning to become, using a word that's popular today, more mindful, that there is a proper form and sequence to developing mindful awareness. And I want to, okay, sorry, I'm not sure. Let's see if I can share this. The circle. In the beginning was the one, the absolute, the wholly affirming, from the law of three. And Mr. Gurdjieff said that the law that rules the wholly affirming, everything is under law. The wholly affirming is under the law of one, the law of unity. So the symbol that best expresses this unity is the circle. Are we seeing the triangle? No?
Just the circle still.
Okay. Let me just... the next law, this is the holy reconciling, is the law of three. And at the top, we can say affirming. To the left, we can say denying. And to the right, we can say reconciling. The higher from the top blends with the lower on the left to meet in the middle on the right. In the perfect expression of this, it's the equilateral triangle. For most of us, we are abnormal beings. We do not have this equilateral triangle. Our head brain is the top, our body brain is the bottom, and our feeling brain is in the middle. And Mr. Gurdjieff's Institute for the Harmonious Development of Man was really about creating this equilateral triangle within ourselves. Meeting control, stop sharing. Sorry. So that was the holy reconciling, the three. The next one is the six. So in the beginning was the one, and the one is the holy affirming. Then the three is the holy reconciling. And the six is the holy denying. Now the holy affirming and the holy denying meet together. So 1 and 6 meet together to form 3. So our head brain meets with our body brain to come to our feeling brain. And understanding this represents the proper form and sequence to developing our inner being. We have to first begin with the holy denying, which is represented by the 6, which is represented by the hexagram here in this picture. This is a symbolic, idealized representation of what we can experience within ourselves as our physical body, as the physical dimension of ourself. So the sensation of self. So I would like to encourage those of you who are watching, those of you who are watching on YouTube, who are watching and following on Facebook Live, to do your best in your own way to become aware of the sensation of self. Ultimately, we want to be aware of our whole body as one organic whole. But for some people, this task is a little bit too much. And so they have to develop this ability. So perhaps starting with the feet, moving up through the ankles, up through the knees, up through the hips, up through the hands and hips, up through the torso and arms, up to the shoulders, up to the neck, up to the head. That's a very brief and quick utilization of Mr. Gurdjieff's filling exercise. J.G. Bennett moving 30 points down the right side of the body and back up 30 points on the other side is another rendition of sensing and developing the sensory awareness of the body. George Adi, first focusing on the right arm, then the right leg, then the left leg, then the left arm, then the spine, then the skull, then the bones in the face, then down into our throat, our chest, our solar plexus, our abdomen, pelvis, down to our reproductive organs is another way of doing this. So a lot of the inner work and the inner exercises in the Gurdjieff tradition begin with self-sensing. This is actually number 6 in terms of the levels and the realms of the holy affirming, holy denying, holy reconciling. So this is actually the lowest level of those 3 divine forces. It's the one that's most accessible to us and the one where we should begin our work. But, this begins, and ultimately, just a second, ultimately, the very high part, the head brain. The head brain is the representative of the holy affirming, the highest part. This really has to be in the dominant position. The higher blends with the lower to meet in the middle. So this is represented in terms of self-remembering with the receiving of impressions. So to become conscious of all of the different objects, shapes, lights, colors entering my eyes, to be aware, and this is a level of personal consciousness and self-remembering. So it's to be aware of my eyes receiving visual information. So become aware of your eyes receiving visual information. This is represented, so our head brain is the representation in ourself of the holy affirming. This should be in the first position, the holy affirming. The higher blends with the lower, which is the holy denying, our physical body, to meet in the middle as the holy reconciling. So the idealized representation of the holy affirming, the law of one, the unity at the highest level of creation is the circle. The representation of, and come back to this, of the holy denying is the hexagram. This is the 6. It's under 6 forces, 6 laws. I've described this before. I don't want to go into it in great detail now. But this is the representation. This is the symbolic representation at a higher level of our physical body. The law of 6, the holy denying. And then the representation of the holy reconciling is the equilateral or equilateral triangle. So what's contained within all of those symbols is, and I had this all set up earlier, and then I got kind of, things weren't working properly. So I'm sorry for those of you who are at home seeing my computer and desktop and everything, but I will stop that other sharing. And so they all come together in this symbol. The circle on the outside is the holy affirming. The triangle on the inside, the equilateral triangle, is the holy reconciling. The hexagram, the 6 points, is the holy denying. So the holy affirming blends with the holy denying to meet in the middle, which is the holy reconciling. And so this symbol, at its most basic level, is a representation of what we can call the Godhead, or the highest level of reality, the holy affirming, holy denying, holy reconciling regions. It's also a symbolic representation of ourselves at a higher level, the head brain, the body brain, and the feeling brain. And understanding the nature of the higher, in other words, the holy affirming blends with the lower, the holy denying, to meet in the middle as the holy reconciling, teaches us and is an encapsulation of the proper form and sequence to developing mindful awareness. Now, another very interesting thing, let me just pull this up. If I can find it really quickly. I had it on my desktop. Again, I'm just, for the people who are watching this, they're seeing my desktop. I'm not sure here it is. The more I think about this, the more important I realize this is. And I'm going to try and expand this. In Gurdjieff Reconsidered, to one of his French students, Mr. Gurdjieff gave a profound vow. And I'm going to share this with us. And when I think about it, all inner work should begin with this vow. I wish to be. I can be. I have the right to be. I have the ability to be. I swear to myself that this will never be for my personal profit, but to help others. I wish to be to help others. This is to be understood as a vow. And something I'm going to do, not right away, I've got so much on my plate, is I want to go back and redo all of the inner exercises I have online and to begin them with this, so that we approach the work with the proper understanding. That we are not doing this to develop powers, to develop abilities, to be able to control other people, to do, to develop and become conscious or whatever. We're doing this and we are developing our being as an act of service. And so this is very important. This is very essential. I've always talked about before how it's always best to consider before we begin working that I am doing this work for myself. I am doing this work for my fellow human being. And I am doing this work for the earth herself. But this is even more primordial, even more basic. I am doing this work as an act of service, not for myself, not for my own personal interests, but to help my fellow human being and to help the world. And this puts the work into a greater context. They talk about the great work. This is how this links back to that idea. So all of the inner work that we do, we're not doing it for ourselves. We are not here for ourselves. We serve a higher purpose. And if we want to serve an even higher purpose, we have to learn to transform a higher energy. So if we live in the mechanical state, we only serve a very mechanical purpose for great nature. And when we begin to become more personally conscious and begin to develop our inner being, we begin to be of higher service to this planet. And then when we begin to awaken and develop that even higher being, we become of even higher service. So we are not transforming ourselves. We are not working on ourselves for our own subjective, egotistical, egocentric ends. We are doing this for humanity and for the earth, that our actions have ramifications and consequences that extend beyond ourselves. So the most important dimension in terms of this inner work and beginning it with ourselves is to develop the awareness or the sensation of self. The most basic exercise that Mr. Gurdjieff gave was the filling exercise. And as a vessel fills with warm golden honey, imagine or sense your body filling with sensation. And so we start with the bottom of the feet. So where the feet are touching the floor, the soles of our feet, become aware of the soles of your feet. And then fill with sensation from the soles of your feet up through your entire feet. And then from the soles of your feet, fill with sensation up to your ankles, up to your knees. So through your lower legs, up to your knees, up through your upper legs to your hips, filling with sensation up through your hips to your lower torso, to your midriff in the middle part of your torso, up through your chest, shoulder blades, upper back, up to your shoulder, filling with sensation from the bottom of your feet up through your fingers, your wrists, your arms, lower arms, elbows, upper arms, up to your shoulders, filling with sensation from the bottom of your feet all the way up to your shoulders, up through your neck, up through your head to the top of your head. This was the most basic exercise that Mr. Gurdjieff taught. J.G. Bennett did what he called the 60-point exercise. And here, breathe in molecules of relaxation, breathe out, or breathe in molecules of awareness, or breathe in awareness, breathe out tension. And he would start with the top of the head, then move to the right side of the forehead, the right eye, and perhaps not breathe in. I'm going to go through this quicker than our breath. Just become aware of these points. The right eye, the right side of the nose and face, the right ear and the finer muscles in the right side of the head, the right side of the mouth and jaw, the right side of the throat and neck, the right shoulder, right upper arm and elbow, right lower arm and wrist, the top of the right hand, the right thumb, index finger, middle finger, fourth finger, index finger, the palm of the right hand, moving up to the right side of the chest, the right side of the midriff and abdomen, the right side of the upper back and shoulder blade, the right side of the lower back, the right hip and buttock, the right upper leg and knee, the right lower leg and ankle, the top of the right foot, the right big toe, second toe, middle toe, fourth toe, baby toe, the bottom of the right foot, and then moving and reversing this, the bottom of the left foot, the left baby toe, the left fourth toe, the left middle toe, the left second toe, the left big toe, the top of the left foot, the left ankle and lower leg, the left knee and upper leg, the left buttock and hip, the left side of the lower back, the left side of the upper back and shoulder blade, the left side of the pelvis and abdomen and midriff, the left side of the chest, the left palm, the left baby finger, fourth finger, index, or baby finger, fourth finger, middle finger, index finger, the left thumb, the top of the left hand, the left wrist and lower arm, the left elbow and upper arm, the left shoulder, the left jaw, side of the jaw and mouth, the left side of the head and the left ear, the left side of the face and nose, the left eye, the left forehead, and then finishing with the top of the head. That's another way of sensing our body, becoming present to our body. Gurdjieff had one. I'm not going to go through it all, but we can sort of do it very briefly. So rather than go through all the various different points, become aware of our right arm, become aware of our right leg, our left arm, become aware of all of our arms together, become aware of our forelimbs and our spine, become aware of our forelimbs, spine, the plates in our skull, then moving down into the bones in our face, the nasal bone, the eye bones, the eye sockets, down into the bones in our face, into our mouth, then down into our throat, our chest, our midriff, solar plexus, our abdomen, pelvis, to our reproductive organs. That's another way of developing this sensation of self, to become aware of our physical body. Now, the goal is to become aware of our physical body as one organic whole. So as you sit there listening to this, try to develop that physical sensation of self. And recognize that before, when you were in the mechanical state, you were transforming hydrogen-24, the very mechanical energy. Now that we've stepped up from that state of waking sleep into the state of personal consciousness, which we can call mindfulness, into the state of personal consciousness, we are transforming a higher level of energy, hydrogen-24. It's twice as intelligent, twice as refined, twice as vibrant as the energy we were transforming before. Bring your attention right now to the air. Focus solely on the air flowing through your nostrils. And then in this moment, you are actually transforming hydrogen-24 in the soles of your feet, because you were no longer aware of the soles of your feet. Now that you've become aware and personally conscious of the soles of your feet, you're stepping up a whole order of reality into this level of personal consciousness, into this different energetic state. And as you do, you are leaving behind impressions of a higher order, tiny, small, infinitesimal crystallizations, memories inside of you of this experience. And when we accumulate these crystallizations, these memories within us, we begin to grow an inner body. Now we have to grow this inner body in the proper form and sequence. If we do not do it in the proper form and sequence, it grows sort of in an abnormal, artificial way. And at that point, Mr. Gurdjieff talked about, if we get too developed, we have to melt it down and recrystallize it, which involves a tremendous amount of suffering. So it's a good idea to understand the proper nature of developing this inner self. The higher blends with the lower to meet in the middle. And so the sensation of self, we have to work on it first because it almost has to become second nature. It has to slip into second position, so to speak. This awareness of our body, this mindful awareness of our body, this being personally conscious of our body can never be habitual. It can never be an automatic realization. We have to develop this ability so well we can hold on to it with that awareness in the back of our awareness, but it's always a result of conscious and deliberate intent. So we first have to develop this muscle, this ability to become aware of our physical body, to become aware of this representation of the holy denying force. And the holy denying force is world 6, is so far beyond world 48 and world 24, where we can exist in now. But when we think of the higher blending with the lower, meeting in the middle, our body is the lower within ourselves. It is the most accessible, the thing that we can work on first and develop first. So this sensory awareness, this sensation of self, this organic awareness of our body, and try to bring your awareness back to the sensation of self as much as you can. Try to hold on to it. Until about 10 years ago, I could not talk and maintain an awareness of my body at the same time. I'm doing this right now. I have to confess that I've been slipping in and out of it through what I've been talking about at today's meeting. But right now, because I'm very aware of it, I am holding this sensation of self, this awareness of my body from the bottom of my feet to the top of my head, in the back of my awareness while I am speaking. It used to be as soon as I started speaking, I would lose this awareness. And this was in part because of the hypnotic quality of language, that there's a dimension of unreality to language, an illusionary dimension to language. And so to get into language, I would lose this awareness of myself. So the most important ability is to sense our body. And Mr. Gurdjieff said it's a good idea to sense the body from the bottom of the feet to the top of the head. Relaxation should flow down, sensation should flow up. So as you develop this ability, as you grow this metaphorical muscle, it's always best to begin at the bottom and grow up. Though you can do J.G. Bennett's exercise, you can do Georgia D's exercise, which I have in the morning sitting on the Gurdjieff Group of Toronto YouTube channel. I think that's the most important exercise that we can begin our day with. It goes a bit deeper into some of the inner work, but to develop that sensation of self. Now, Mr. Gurdjieff said that nature provides the first mechanical shock. We grow along 3 lines: the octave of food, the octave of air, and the octave of impressions. And this is related to the octave. And within an octave, there are 3 points where things get stuck, between mi and fa, and between si and do. So an octave will move from do, re, mi, and then it will get stuck, and it will need some kind of energy from the outside. He said that nature provides this through the octave of air coming in at that particular point. So the octave of air allows the food octave to develop to a proper level, up to C12. And law 24 is the molecule involved in the awareness of ourself, the sensation of self, that sensory awareness. And this is also why it is best to begin with the sensation of self, because just by naturally breathing in, we have developed ourselves up to the point where we can really begin to exercise this sensation of self, this sensory awareness of our body. But nature provides the first mechanical shock. In order for our being to develop, we then have to create an artificial shock, which he called the first conscious shock. And let me just bring, sorry for those of you who are watching through Facebook. Let me just bring this up. I know what I've done. I've got this all backwards there. For those of you who've seen my wall, you'll recognize this picture on my wall. I'm just going to share the screen with it. So on the left, let me bring up the ability to draw. So this is the octave of, of food. This molecule right here, La 24, air, just breathing. The octave of air comes in and it helps give this sufficient force. So just by breathing, we have the ability to really develop the sensation of self. And this is another reason why we have to first begin developing this physical awareness. It's the easiest thing to do to develop the sensation of self. Just by breathing, we actually have the molecules and we have the higher and lower within ourselves that really and readily allow us to develop this. Mr. Gurdjieff said that the first conscious shock, and this is illustrated in the middle diagram, I'm just going to circle it, is Do on the octave of impressions. And through the first conscious shock, it allows us, so if you look at the left, that's the normal human being in the ideal state. In the middle, this is the result of the first conscious shock. This is the level of personal consciousness. This is metaphorically through visual representation what the Kesdjan body is, what that first development of the inner body is. And if you notice on the left diagram, Do of the octave of air comes in where I'm highlighting it. Me here, this Do of the octave of impressions comes in at the Me of the octave of air and also allows it to develop. And this is the next step, the next thing that we need to do. So I'm just going to stop sharing this and come back. So the receiving of impressions, what I see, all of the light, the shape, the objects, the forms, everything coming into my eyes. My eyes are receiving impressions right now. For the most part, we just look mechanically. We're not aware of receiving the impressions. Now, you can't see him. My dog is right over here. He's got different eyes, different nose, different ear than humans. So he sees more black and white. His sense of smell is 30,000 times better than ours. So he lives in a different world of smell. His hearing, he can hear sounds I can't hear. So everything that I see, hear, smell, and taste are necessarily conditioned by my own organs of perception. So when Mr. Gurdjieff was describing the proper way to receive an impression, this is the head brain. It's to become aware of my eyes receiving visual information. So to become aware either of my eyeballs or right here, as best I can, receiving all of this light. It's also important to be aware of the peripheral of our vision. Paul Beidler talked about, he talked about the impartial gaze. So partial, impartial, personal, objective, subjective, objective. Our subjective gaze as opposed to our objective gaze. to become aware of what my eyes are seeing here, now, in this moment, is to properly receive a visual impression. To become aware of what my ears are hearing in this moment is to receive a proper auditory impression. To become aware of the smells around, the smell of my body, the smell of the room, the fact that it's my nose and the olfactory sensors, or there's nodes and whatever in the nose that are sensing the smell. To become aware of the taste in my mouth, the fact that it is my mouth tasting. And sleep, waking sleep, personal consciousness, objective consciousness, personal consciousness is the first step up. Step into mindful awareness, a step into World 24. It's to be aware of my eyes, me receiving visual impressions, my ears receiving auditory impressions, my nose receiving olfactory impressions, my taste buds receiving gustatory impressions. What I am seeing, hearing, smelling, and tasting is not reality. There are all these graphs of, we see, the visual spectrum is this big and we see this much. And it's the same with the auditory spectrum, it's this big, and human hearing is this much. We do not objectively perceive reality. We are not capable of hearing what dogs can hear, of hearing the full range of sounds. We are only capable of receiving what our human ears are capable of receiving, what our human eyes are capable of receiving. My uncle was colorblind. He couldn't differentiate between red and green. So he had a different visual apparatus. His eyes were different than mine. His ability to see was slightly different than mine. So this is what we should be doing in first position. We should be receiving impressions. So perhaps we have to build up to this awareness. The same way that we go through these various sensorial exercises. So to become aware of our feet, and to become aware of our ankles and our lower legs and our knees and our upper legs and our hips, to build up a greater and greater and greater awareness of the sensation of our body until we can develop the sensation of self. And we have to do this as well with the impressions that we receive with our head brain. Perhaps all we can do at the beginning is to focus on what we can see, to become aware of the visual impressions that are coming into our eyes. But we have to develop this ability to become aware, to become mindful of what we can see. And then, while being aware of what we can see, to develop the ability to become aware of what we can hear. And while being aware of what we can see, what we can hear, to become aware of the ability to become aware of what we can smell. And while being aware of what we can see, hear, smell, to also become aware of what we can taste. So in a similar fashion, as we develop bigger and bigger sensations and sensory awareness of our body, we also need to develop our head brain properly. I have to admit that for myself, I start with hearing. I start with sounds. And this is what I did back in 1981. I first started with sounds, and then I became aware of images and sights. Then I became aware of smells, and then I became aware of the taste in my mouth. I'm very auditory. I'm very receptive to accents and things like that. But the ultimate aim is to do them all together. So to look, listen, smell, and taste all at the same time, while We are sensing our body as one organic whole. So we begin by developing the sensation of our body, building it up step by step by step. And then when we have that developed, and this is part of nature's first mechanical shock, it comes with air entering us. So it's something that we can all do. And then we have to begin to develop the octave of impressions, to become aware of what we can see, hear, smell, taste, to build up this awareness. And at first, you will find that you can only do it for spurts of between 5 and 15 seconds. It takes a long time to really develop this because it's all related to energy. And if we don't have the sufficient higher molecules within us that allow this transformation to take place, we won't be able to do it. So a lot of this work is accumulating these higher particles. Again, coming back to the morning sitting exercise that I've taken from an exercise that Georgia Nee gave to his pupils in Australia. That's a good place to begin to accumulate these higher energies. So the higher, my head brain, to look with mindful intent, to hear, smell, taste with mindful intent, while sensing with the sensory brain. So the higher blends with the lower to meet in the middle. And then the next one is our feeling brain. It's the development and awareness of our emotional self and our feelings. And I've talked about this in previous meetings. It's more like a shimmering quality often to our feelings and to develop this awareness. So I'm relating the Enneagram to the circle, the holy affirming, the triangle, the holy reconciling, and I probably won't be able to do it, the hexagram, the holy denying. And these are represented within us as the head brain, the body brain, and the feeling brain. And the higher blends with the lower. So our head brain perceptions should blend with our body brain sensations, and then to develop our feeling brain feelings to become a proper human being. And people talk about what's the difference between man number 1, 2, and 3 and man number 4. From what I can gather, man number 4 has begun to step up to the level of World 24. They've begun to develop this mindful awareness, this personal consciousness, this self-reflectivity, and they've begun to harmonize these 3 dimensions of their being, the head, the body, and the feelings. And that, these layers, man number 4, it's not that you're either a man number 4 or you're not. It's, you can be a low 4, a medium 4, a high 4. It's like a continuum. Mr. Gurdjieff said that each note of an octave can contain a whole octave within itself. So you may think the note is do, but do within it has do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si within it, the octave. So within that category, you can be right at the top or you can be down at the bottom. It all involves beginning with personal consciousness. Within the teachings, you go to certain groups and they say you're a machine, you're going to die like a machine, you're going to die like a dog, and they try and instill too much fear and hopelessness and despair within you. But the moment you become aware of the nail on the baby finger of your left hand, you've stepped up beyond that realm of machine. You've stepped up beyond the realm of the dog, and you've started to become proper human, a proper man, a proper person. Mr. Gurdjieff talked about man in quotation marks. That's sleeping machine-like man, and man without quotation marks. And so just bringing this level of personal reflectivity, becoming aware of our body, becoming aware of what we can see, hear, smell, taste, that our eyes, ears, nose, and taste buds are receiving impressions, while aware of our body, to become aware of our head brain receiving impressions, while aware of the sensation of ourself, and becoming aware of our feelings. we are actually moving up within the category of man number 4, and we're beginning the process of harmonizing our being. So it begins with baby steps. It begins with the sensation of self, and then adding seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, then adding the awareness of what we're feeling, just slowly building through this. And as a hypnotherapist, I know that when I talk about, for instance, becoming aware of the nail on the baby finger of my left hand, that those listening have a tendency to become aware of the nail on the baby finger of your left hand. So as I've been explaining this, as I've been talking about some of this, hopefully you will have been bringing yourself to those different levels of awareness, to those different things that you can perceive. The other thing is it's much easier to do this with a group of people. There's a collective energy that can arise from doing this with other people. And it's also much easier to do this when you have some kind of guided instruction. And so on the Gurdjieff Group of Toronto YouTube channel, I do have a list now of, I think it's 12 inner exercises. I think I'm going to remaster them to put that vow in at the beginning that I talked about to prevent us from going off the rails and trying to develop these abilities because we want to control other people or whatever, to bring it back to work with humanity. And I've got a series of exercises called the Self-Remembering series as well. And I think I'm going to redo those because I actually wrote the script for those almost 10 years ago now, to update them to my new understanding and add, the proper vow at the beginning and things like that. But I've got a lot of this on that channel, building it up step by step. So it becomes easier if you listen to something, if you watch it on YouTube. For my Self-Remembering series, I actually have the words on the screen. I created over 1,700 individual slides to create that. Now that I have Premiere Pro, I could have done it in a tenth of the time. And I probably will convert it to Premiere Pro so I can just have the text sliding up. Much easier for me, simpler. But still a bit of work, but it's all there to work on ourselves. The theory is one thing, and the theory helps to explain this. I'm explaining all of this because of my understanding of the theory. You don't need to understand the theory to develop the sensation of self. You've got to practice becoming aware of your body as often as you can, as fully as you can, as many times as you can throughout the day, and building this up. You don't have to know why, but it is so important. It's the most important thing a person can do when they first step on the path. Okay. We're just about out of time. Any questions, any comments, just briefly before we end?
Allan,
Yes?
one thing I would really like to have you discuss sometime in the future is how to give up unnecessary suffering.
Mhm. Okay, that's in it.
I recently had a sort of an epiphany about that.
Yeah.
Some help on it.
Yeah. In a brief nutshell, in these teachings, we talk about personal and impersonal, subjective and objective. Subjective suffering is unnecessary suffering. Objective suffering is different. And so it's really learning to distinguish what the difference between subjective means. And subjective is egocentric. Me. How can this happen to me? And why me? And there's so much suffering that people do that's subjective, that's useless. And objective suffering is, you can twist your ankle, and subjective suffering is, oh, my ankle. And the objective suffering is to just be mindful and aware of the pain that happens every time you step. But I will go in more into this. This is a very important distinction between impersonal and personal, between objective and subjective. We want to move up to that state of objective consciousness, the awakened state. So yeah, I will get into that. Yeah. Any other comments or anything before we go? No. We did a bit of an inner exercise. So, in a meandering way, me explaining it. Let's just become aware of the fact that we have an atmosphere surrounding our body. Mr. Gurdjieff said he called this exercise the collected state exercise, and we should always finish inner work with the collected state. In other words, we collect our atmosphere to ourselves. And as the earth has an atmosphere, so too do we have an atmosphere. And he said, try to make the atmosphere, try to bring it so it's about a meter and a half, like 4 to 6.5 feet around our body. Try to become aware of the boundary of your atmosphere. Keep it calm, keep it tranquil, keep it still. At the end of all inner exercises, we should focus on bringing this atmosphere into this collected state. And then once we've collected it, we should breathe it into ourselves. And so I'm going to count from 1 up to 3 and become aware of your atmosphere. Keep it calm, keep it still, keep it contained. And then 1, 2, 3, breathe it into yourself. And then as you breathe out, imagine something remains. Mr. Gurdjieff said that we shouldn't rush off after doing inner work. We should give it time and allow the emanations to settle within ourselves. He also said it's good to properly end inner work with an affirmation. So silently repeat in your mind, may results from today's inner work be substantiated in me for my being. And thank you all for coming. And I look forward to seeing you again next week. And I forgot to post about the time change and how we've moved forward. And so hopefully a few more people might be joining us next week, just as a result of because some places in the world you don't change, but we in North America think the world jumps to what we do, and so we get a little blinded by our own self-importance and thinking that everyone will realize that, spring forward and fall back as we've changed our clock. So thank you all, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day. And do inner work. Do inner work. Inner work. More important than reading any books is the inner work of practical exercises. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.